The most dangerous thing you can do with your life isn't to fail. It's to live it on autopilot, never pausing to think, following routines that extinguish you without your even noticing. In this audiobook, we're not going to preach religious rules or ancient laws. We're going to talk about you, about what you hide, what you keep silent, what weighs you down. This isn't a sermon, it's a mirror. And not everyone is ready to look, but you are. Because if you're here, it's because a part of you has grown tired of pretending, and it's ready to wake up. Chapter 1. The God you invented to avoid yourself. Some people don't believe in God because they feel let down by the one they were sold. Others believe too much, but only in the God they built to avoid facing themselves. Sometimes, believing in something higher becomes the perfect excuse to stop asking uncomfortable questions. There are those who pray every day but never pause for a second to ask themselves why they need to pray so much. Not out of gratitude, not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of being punished. Fear of not being enough. Fear that if they stop repeating certain words, something up there will break and strike them down. Is that faith? Or a cage filled with incense? Since childhood, we were taught to imagine a watchful God, clipboard in hand and a stern expression. A God who punishes when you act and rewards when you obey. They painted him with a beard, with fire, with thunder. But what they never told us is that many times, the God we fear is just a warped reflection of our own guilt and anxieties. We built him to feel small, to avoid making decisions, to hide from ourselves. Because when you place someone else above you, you can also dodge your responsibilities. You kneel to avoid walking. You take comfort in, he knows best, because you don't want to know anything. It's easier to think God willed it so, than to admit you made the wrong choice, that you surrendered yourself, that you're living a life that doesn't even represent you. Some say, I'll leave it in God's hands, but what they really do is let go of the steering wheel and close their eyes, hoping someone else will save them from the crash. But God didn't come to drive for you. If anything divine exists, it cares more about seeing you choose with courage than rewarding your docility. The God you've created to fit your comfort isn't a guide. It's a refuge, and not a good one. It's the kind of hideout you retreat to whenever you should be making important choices. The refuge that justifies your silence when you know you should speak up. The one that lets you live a mediocre life while telling yourself you're being humble. You've learned to use spirituality as an elegant alibi. You say you're obedient, that you accept whatever comes, that you flow with the divine plan. But inside you know that most of the time this means giving up before you even start, avoiding conflict, avoiding change. It's not surrender, it's resignation in fancy dress. And here's the curious thing, that God you fear, the one you claim to love, probably has nothing to do with the reality out there. He might be far greater. He might be infinitely freer. He might have no rules, no punishments, no fear. And if that's true, then you're not connected to God. You're trapped in your own caricature of him. Religion, in its most distorted forms, taught us that we're guilty from birth, that we come broken and need saving. But no one is born guilty. Guilt is a human invention to control other humans, and you've accepted it as inheritance, without questioning it, examining it, or returning it. Maybe that's why when someone asks what you believe, you recite ready-made phrases, because you've never stopped to feel it. You've inherited an idea without filtering it through your own experience. Like inheriting an old house but never bothering to see if it has light, if it has cracks, if it's even habitable. And here's what matters. The sacred isn't up there, sealed inside an ancient book. The sacred is in how you rise when everything hurts, in how you speak to yourself when you make a mistake, in how you treat others when no one is watching. That is true spirituality. Everything else is form, masking. This chapter doesn't ask you to stop believing. It asks you to believe for real. To stop hiding behind an invisible figure just so you don't have to face your own decisions. To stop repeating prayers you don't mean, promises you don't keep, dogmas you don't understand. And to start listening, really listening. Not with your ears, but with courage. The God you invented to avoid yourself doesn't need more incense. He needs you to dismantle him, to question him, to ask whether the God who watches you also embraces you, whether he frees you or locks you in. Because a God who won't let you grow isn't God. He's an emotional prison. And you weren't born for that. You were born to move, to transform, to make mistakes, and begin again. You were born to build a direct relationship with whatever lies beyond, but from your truth, not from fear. Perhaps it's time to stop asking permission to live. Maybe it's time to stop bargaining for your worth. Maybe true faith isn't kneeling, it's looking in the mirror without filters. Because if God is anywhere, he's probably right there, in that uncomfortable space where you finally decide to see yourself as you are. No masks, no excuses, no fear. Chapter 2. Faith as an excuse for inaction. Faith, when misunderstood, becomes the coward's favorite refuge. Yes, there are people who believe wholeheartedly, with dignity, and who act on that belief. But there are also those who claim faith while hiding behind it to avoid the real world. They talk about trusting the universe, surrendering to the divine plan, yet they won't lift a finger to move from where they've been stuck for years. They call inaction patience. They call laziness acceptance. They call leaving it in God's hands a way of not taking the reins of their life. But that's not spirituality. That's shirking responsibility. True faith doesn't paralyze. Healing faith doesn't numb. Transformative faith doesn't wait for someone else to fix everything. Faith is not an excuse to fold your arms while life's express train passes you by. It's not a get out of responsibility card, nor a justification for your fears masquerading as confidence. Believing shouldn't mean waiting forever. Because if that wait isn't paired with intention, action, conscious choices, all you're doing is filling time with empty catchphrases that sound nice, but change nothing inside. Some have been telling themselves for years that everything arrives in its time, that if it hasn't happened yet, it wasn't meant for them, that when the right moment comes, everything will fall into place. Meanwhile, they don't learn, don't risk, don't question, don't get up. They just wait, always wait. As if God were a delivery driver who shows up only when you behave well, with a perfect box bearing your name. Life, my friend, doesn't work that way. Life rewards the daring. Those who trust, but also get their hands dirty. Those who understand that faith can be a guiding flame, but it doesn't ignite itself. You have to bring the kindling. You have to stoke it. You have to burn sometimes. Saying, "I trust what's meant for me will come," without doing anything, is like wanting to harvest without planting seeds. Like hoping to heal without touching the wound. Like wanting to move forward without taking a single step. It's comfortable. Of course it is. But comfort is the enemy of growth. This isn't about becoming an action junkie, living in constant anxiety or forcing paths. It's about distinguishing when waiting is wise, and when it's fear dressed up as mysticism. Because there are moments when stillness is necessary, yes. But there are others when stillness is just a stylish escape. Some repeat that everything happens for a reason, like a mantra, without checking whether that reason isn't actually a direct consequence of their own apathy. Because not everything that happens is part of some higher plan. Sometimes things happen because you chose silence, because you procrastinated, because you ignored the signs, because you trusted the universe to handle what you were too afraid to face. Worse still, when that pattern repeats for years, you end up believing that's how life works. You convince yourself that faith means living with crossed arms, that trust means non-intervention, that whatever will be is a profound philosophy, when in reality it can be a sentence of immobility. The wisest people I know aren't those who pray the most, who read the most spiritual books, or who speak solemnly about destiny. They're the ones who look squarely at reality, who own their part, who ask questions, who make mistakes, who fall, but never let faith blind them. They use it as fuel, not as anesthesia. And that's the game changer. Faith shouldn't soothe you into numbness. It should drive you forward. It should give you the courage to step onto the stage, even if you still don't know how the play ends. Because if faith only serves to wait, then you're missing half the journey. We live in an era where spirituality is trendy. Thousands of quotes, rituals, gurus, recipes to attract what you desire. But if behind it all there isn't real accountability for your life, all you're doing is decorating it with pretty words. And faith isn't proven by words. It's proven by the choices you make each morning, even when your legs are trembling. It's not about stopping believing. It's about ensuring your faith doesn't turn you into a spectator of your own existence. That you don't use "God will provide" as an excuse not to move. That you don't wait for a miracle when you're ignoring what you yourself must do. That you stop calling trust what is really a clever way to dodge responsibility. Because some things only happen when you dare. Some doors only open when you push. Some paths only reveal themselves once you take the first step. Faith isn't closing your eyes and waiting. It's opening them and moving forward, even when you don't yet understand it all. If you're listening, it's because something inside you already knows this. Senses that you've been postponing. Hints that you're hiding behind a spirituality that sounds good, but doesn't transform you. And you know it, even if you don't say it out loud. You feel it in that silent void that no mantra or calendar quote can fill. You don't need more time. You don't need more signs. You need to trust again, but in motion, with your feet on the ground, with your hands doing the work, with your soul awake. Because when faith is real, it doesn't wait. It walks. Chapter 3. Confusing Fear with Respect. There comes a moment in everyone's life when they learn to lower their gaze, to keep quiet even when they have something to say, to obey, not because they understand, but because they were taught that questioning is dangerous. That moment might slip by unnoticed, like just another scene from childhood or a mislearned lesson from adolescence, but it forever shapes how you relate to what you consider higher. And from that silence, planted so young, you begin to confuse fear with respect. We've been told to respect God by fearing Him, fearing His wrath, His judgment, His gaze. We've seen Him as an unquestionable authority, with a grave voice and immutable laws. And if you ever dare to doubt His commands, you're labeled proud, playing with fire, inviting punishment. But no one explained that such fear often springs not from faith, but from conditioning, from repetition, from inherited terror. You were taught that God is sacred, but no one took the time to help you discover what that means in your own life. So you bowed your head, not out of humility, but out of insecurity, not out of awe, but out of dread of the consequences. Respect isn't fear. Respect is understanding something's greatness without relinquishing your place in the world. It's recognizing what's valuable without submitting. It's gazing with reverence without disappearing. But if what you call respect springs from fear of punishment, you're no longer respecting. You're evading. You're obeying under duress. You're denying your own self to avoid upsetting a figure you're not even sure exists. The problem is this habit seeps into everything. Your relationships, your work, your self-talk. You start calling submission respect. You tolerate what hurts you because you must respect. You lose sight of your own feelings and opinions. Because if you grew up believing God watches you and you must behave or fall from grace, you've likely turned that gaze into an ever-present inner surveillance. A security camera in your mind that judges every impulse, every desire, every doubt. And bit by bit, you repress your truest self in the name of respect that was really fear in disguise. No one taught you that true respect can mean saying no. No one told you that you can honor the sacred through honesty, through doubt, through an inner dialogue. You learn to be silent, to nod, to pretend peace, even when you're raging inside. And that, over time, doesn't build faith. It builds masks. Masks so familiar, you end up believing they're you. There's a vast difference between revering something because you understand it, because you felt it, because it's moved you, and revering it because you're too afraid to face uncomfortable questions. When you can't tell the difference, spirituality becomes theater. Everyone knows the lines, the actions, the solemn tone, but very few feel free. True respect springs from connection, from standing before something greater without feeling diminished, from acknowledging a force beyond yourself without shrinking, from standing tall in the face of mystery without needing to bow to belong. But if what you feel is fear, your bond is broken. No one should have to tremble to believe. No one should need guilt to feel included. Fear speaks with an authoritative voice, a severe gaze, an uncomfortable silence. Respect speaks with listening, dialogue, space. One paralyzes you, the other frees you. One locks you in childish obedience, the other invites internal growth. Fear controls, respect transforms. But if no one taught you the difference, it's natural to stay trapped in confusion. It's not your fault you grew up this way, but it is your responsibility to revisit it now. Ask yourself whether your respect comes from honoring or from fearing the fallout. And if you discover fear, don't run. Stay. Listen. Move through it. Because on the other side of that poorly costumed fear may await the real faith. One that doesn't terrify, doesn't subjugate, doesn't demand you deny yourself to feel close to the eternal. Chapter 4. Silence is not absence. There are moments in life when everything seems to go dark. When what once made sense now rings hollow. When you beg for a sign and none comes. When you speak to God, to the universe, to whoever, and all you hear is your own echo. These moments, felt like endless deserts, make us believe something's wrong. That we're not heard. That maybe we've messed up so badly even life has turned its back on us. But silence, however painful, isn't abandonment. What happens is we've been taught to measure presence by noise. To believe that without an immediate answer there's no connection. To think that if we don't sense something spectacular, nothing is happening. Yet the most precious, the most transformative work, the soul's deep reordering, rarely arrives with fanfare. It comes in silence. It comes when you stop speaking, begging, trying to control. Silence unsettles because it confronts you with yourself. It leaves you alone with your thoughts, your unhealed wounds, your unresolved questions. Often, instead of staying, instead of inhabiting it, you flee to noise, distraction, anything to escape that void you think you cannot bear. But here's the truth. That void isn't empty. It's full of you, of what you haven't heard, of what you haven't allowed yourself to feel, of what you've been too scared to face. Real spirituality begins when you dare to remain in that silence without demanding its end. When you stop pleading for answers and become the listener. Because many times what you expect from outside is already inside you. You just can't hear it over your own questions. You don't know how to be still without impatience. You mistake calm for indifference. And no, you won't always receive a clear phrase, a revealing vision, a miraculous push. Sometimes silence simply deepens, and so do you. Sometimes the answer doesn't come in words, but in certainties that emerge quietly, as if they'd been waiting for you to finally hush enough for them to surface. Our culture prizes immediacy. Everything must have an answer, an explanation, a use. We struggle to understand that some processes only unfold when we respect timing. Some wounds don't close with platitudes, but with presence. Some pains don't seek solutions, but understanding. And that often only happens in silence. That silence you fear is often the most honest language of the sacred, because it doesn't try to convince you, distract you, or adorn you. It simply is, and you choose whether to inhabit it or rush back to noise. There are people who've spent years saying they feel nothing, that they've lost faith, that prayer, meditation, journaling, walking, all of it no longer helps. But when you truly listen to them, you discover it's not lack of answers they can't stand, but the vertigo of facing silence with no escape. Because in that silence there are no scapegoats, no excuses, just you, your story, your choices, your deepest fears. And that's where it all begins. Because if you keep seeking outside what you need to hear within, you'll replay the same emptiness over and over, in different guises, different names, different masks. But the core stays the same. A disconnection from yourself no one else can fix. You're not being ignored. You're being invited to a different kind of listening. More honest, more naked, more uncomfortable. One with no scripts, no stock phrases, no reward promises. Just you, breathing, feeling, letting time unfold without rushing. Yes, it can be despairing. When you're broken inside, you crave immediate comfort, a sign that everything will be okay. But when that comfort doesn't come, you might discover something else. That even without signs, you're still here. You're still breathing. You're still feeling. And that silent presence you mistook for absence may be the purest companionship you've ever known. Because it doesn't push you. It doesn't manipulate you. It doesn't demand of you. It only is, and it sustains you, whether you notice it or not, whether it has form or not, whether it gives you the answers you want or not. Sometimes what you need isn't an answer, but a space to begin asking the right questions. And that space is silence. Don't rush to fill it. Don't hurry to explain it. Don't avoid it with words or distractions. Stay there. See what arises. Even if it hurts. Even if it makes you uncomfortable. Even if you understand nothing. Because what discomforts you, what you don't understand, is exactly what you need to face head-on to transform. This chapter doesn't try to convince you that silence is beautiful, because it isn't always. Sometimes it's harsh, dry, unbearable. But that doesn't mean it's empty. It just means it's revealing what you don't yet want to see. And that, however cruel it seems, is also an act of love. Perhaps you've confused silence with absence because you learned to feel accompanied only when someone spoke. But true presence doesn't need words. It's felt. It's known. It's recognized at the very core of your being, in that place where you no longer need to understand, only to be. Don't seek to fill silence with explanations. Inhabit it with presence. Because it's not there to punish you, test you, or abandon you. It's there to offer you the chance to hear yourself, perhaps for the first time, without the world's noise, without other people's voices, without the stories they've told you about who you are and what you should feel. When you realize that silence is not absence, but the space where the sacred breathes without imposing, everything will begin to align differently. Not because of some magical revelation, but because you finally gave yourself permission to stay with yourself. And in that small yet profound gesture, lies all the transformation you were seeking. Chapter 5. Your soul isn't broken, it's ignored. You don't need someone to fix you. You're not shattered like you've been led to believe. What's happening is you've spent too much time not listening to yourself. You've lived under imposed silences, duties disguised as love, expectations that were never yours but that you carried as the price of existence. And amid it all, you gradually forgot yourself. Not all at once, not dramatically, more like softly, progressively, until one day you realize you can't even remember what was in that room of your inner house. Your soul isn't broken. It's buried, hidden beneath layers of survival. Decisions you made to please. Paths you followed to fit in. Words you didn't speak so as not to upset anyone. Promises you made when you didn't yet know who you were. And yes, it hurts. But that pain doesn't mean you're flawed. It means you've grown distant from yourself. We live in a society that labels anything outside the norm as illness. If something hurts, they tell you you're broken. If you feel deeply, they call you weak. If you question, they brand you ungrateful. And you, who just wanted to be enough, adjusted to expectations, unaware that in the process you were giving up the most important thing, your truth. You didn't fail yourself. You just did your best with what you had. And now you find yourself asking why you don't feel fulfilled even though you appear to have everything. Why you can't breathe deeply without that knot in your chest. Why sometimes when no one's watching, a sadness crashes over you that you can't explain. And it makes perfect sense. You can't be well when you've learned to live disconnected from yourself. Your soul doesn't shout. It whispers. And if you don't stop to listen, you'll end up believing that void is your natural state, when in reality it's only the signal that you stopped inhabiting yourself, that you paid more attention to what others expected than to what you needed, that you mastered the art of functioning, but forgot how to feel. You don't need therapy to have someone tell you what to do with your life. You need honesty to admit you've been ignoring what you already know. That parts of you silenced out of fear of losing love, stability, or approval. That you haven't granted yourself permission to ask what you want, what you dream, what moves you. And that doesn't make you lost, it makes you human. The soul doesn't give up, but it gets tired. It's tired of being relegated to Sunday mornings, to spare moments, to existential crises. It's tired of being sought only when everything collapses, of being remembered only when you don't know what else to try. It's tired of being your last resort. And yet, there it remains, waiting. Not to reproach you, but to call you back, to bring you home to yourself. You don't have to climb a mountain to meditate and reconnect. Sometimes it's enough to stop lying to yourself, to admit you're lost, that you're weary, that something inside you needs change and you can't keep putting it off. And that isn't weakness, it's courage. Because the hardest thing isn't sustaining the facade of everything's fine. The hardest is sitting before the mirror, mask-free, and beginning to reclaim what you lost by trying to be who others wanted. Your soul wants to see you act with integrity, wants you to speak your truth, to set boundaries without fearing abandonment, to surround yourself with those who uplift you, not drain you. Wants you to make space for what makes your spirit sing, even if it's uncomfortable. Wants you to let go of what no longer fits, even if it hurts. Because yes, it will hurt. But the cost of ignoring yourself is far greater than any grief you must endure. Reconnecting with your soul isn't mystical. It's an act of presence. It's allowing yourself to feel without judgment. It's acknowledging that you have wounds that heal not with cheap positivity or slogans, but with stillness to hear what you've been avoiding. It's daring to live in your own skin, even if that means dismantling everything you built on someone else's foundation. And it won't happen overnight. Coming home to yourself is a process, sometimes slow, sometimes contradictory, but deeply liberating. Because every time you choose with honesty, Every time you say no to what no longer fits, every time you care for yourself without guilt, you rebuild the bridge to your soul. And that path, though traveled alone, is never solitary. With every step you take toward yourself, everything that truly matters begins to respond from within. You're not broken, you're asleep. And waking up hurts, yes, because it means facing all you set aside to avoid discomfort. But once awakened, there's no turning back. Because when you taste the fullness of living connected to yourself, you won't settle for emotional crumbs. You won't seek validation externally. You won't feel the need to pretend. You begin to truly inhabit yourself. And that is the greatest healing there is. Your soul doesn't need saving. It needs acknowledging. It needs its place restored. Because as long as you ignore it, you'll keep feeling something's missing, even if you have everything you thought you wanted. But the moment you listen, to honor it with real actions, the void transforms into direction. And then you start living, not from lack, but from truth. And there, right there, freedom begins. Chapter 6. What you call sin is sometimes instinct. From a very early age, you were taught to watch yourself, to feel guilty for what you think, for what you desire, for what you feel in the depths of your body. You learned to restrain yourself before you even knew yourself, to deny yourself before you understood yourself, to label as dangerous anything that fell outside the norm, any impulse that didn't fit that rigid inherited idea of purity. They spoke of sin as if it were a stain that appears the moment you act with freedom, as if being human were, in itself, a daily condemnation demanding repentance. And you, wanting to do things right, began tucking away what you felt into locked drawers, accumulating emotions you never voiced, repressing everything that didn't fit that idealized version of correct. But what nobody explained is that often, what you repress in shame, what you hide as if it were an unforgivable offense, isn't sin. It's instinct. It's living nature. It's a legitimate part of you that's never been educated, only condemned. And when you condemn without understanding, it becomes a burden, a conflict. Shame. Not everything you desire is wrong. Not everything you feel needs punishment. There are voices inside you that don't come from the ego or mere whim. They come from the soul, from a deep place silenced for generations out of fear that living authentically would destabilize comfortable systems that function best when people feel bad for simply being themselves. Calling the desire to be free a sin, the impulse to speak the truth a sin, the need to touch, to love, to create, to defend yourself a sin, is a form of control. Because when you feel guilty for feeling, you become more manipulable, more docile, more obedient. You become someone in constant need of redemption, constant approval, constant forgiveness. And that's a profitable arrangement for those who uphold systems fed by your guilt. Instinct is your internal radar. It lets you identify what gives you life and what drains you. It reacts before you can rationalize. It shakes you when something doesn't fit, when something doesn't resonate with you, even if you can't explain why. But if from childhood you learn to distrust that radar, if you're taught that listening to your body is dangerous, that desiring is dirty, that anger is sinful, you end up living with your back turned on your most intimate compass. Then you start making decisions you don't feel, saying yes when every fiber in you screams no, staying where there is nothing left for you, just so as not to upset anyone. And that is not virtue. That is not purity. That is fear disguised as kindness, disconnection adorned with obedience. And in the long run, it costs dearly. Because the soul that isn't allowed to express itself falls ill, and the body that isn't listened to flickers out. This isn't about justifying any act with the word instinct. It isn't about doing whatever you want without regard for consequences. It's about stopping living ashamed of what honestly emerges from within you. About reconciling with your desire, your vital impulse, your need to express yourself without guilt, about understanding that many of the sins you were taught to avoid were, in truth, signals of life that only needed to be understood, channeled, integrated. You didn't come into this world to fit into a list of permitted behaviors. You came to experience yourself, to discover yourself, to learn through your body, through your emotions, through contradiction. And that inevitably involves mistakes. Yes. But not every mistake is a moral failure. Some are part of the process. They are the ways your soul stumbles in order to grow stronger. And if, instead of condemning yourself for every misstep, you learn to look at them with compassion, honesty, curiosity, you could grow instead of shutting down. Guilt doesn't teach. It paralyzes. Punishment doesn't correct. It hides. Fear doesn't purify. It atrophies. And if you keep confusing your instinct with sin, you'll keep rejecting essential parts of yourself. Parts that don't need redemption, but presence. That don't need divine forgiveness, but human permission to be inhabited. Perhaps that's why you feel such distance between what you do and what you truly desire. Perhaps that's why there's a tension no amount of prayer or rules can resolve. Because there's an internal cry that isn't silenced by repeating what others say. There's a part of you that knows you're alive, and that living in fear of yourself isn't living. It's merely enduring. You've been too hard on yourself. You've stayed silent when you wanted to scream. You've bowed your head when you wanted to defend yourself. You've fled your desires as if they were traps, unaware that some of them were clues. They were truths. They were doors to a more coherent, more real, more truly yours life. And now that you're here, hearing this, feeling this, you have the opportunity to start undoing the confusion. To look within without the inherited magnifying glass of judgment. To distinguish between what truly harms you and what only unsettles you because someone taught you not to feel it. Don't confuse yourself any longer. What you sometimes call sin is simply your soul trying to breathe. Your body asking to be heard. Your truth pushing from within so you stop hiding. And you don't need to confess it as if it were a sin. You need to face it head on, without shame, without adornment, without punishment. Because when you stop judging what you feel, you can transform it. When you stop fleeing from yourself, you can begin to inhabit yourself. And that's where everything starts to align. Not from perfection, but from authenticity. You were born with instinct, with desire, with an impulse toward truth. Don't turn it into an enemy. Listen to it. Respect it. Know it. And you'll see that many of the chains that bound you for years were never chains at all, only doors that no one taught you how to open. Chapter 7. Guilt, the most profitable cage in the world. Some sensations don't need an introduction because they live with you every day. Guilt is one of them. It doesn't arrive in a flash. It settles in slowly, in subtle ways, disguised as conscience, as upbringing, as good intention. And the worst part is you often don't even realize you're carrying it, because you learn to live with it like you would learn to live with a pebble in your shoe. Annoying, but part of the journey. Guilt is one of the most effective mechanisms for emotional control, not from the outside, but from within. It needs no chains or walls. It makes you your own jailer. It causes you to question your desires, your decisions, your most honest impulses. It makes you say yes when you want to say no. Keep silent when you should speak up. Push yourself when all you need is to stop and breathe. What's not always said is that throughout history, guilt has been one of the most profitable tools for those who seek power. If they convince you there's something wrong with you, they can sell you endless solutions. If they make you feel like you failed simply by being who you are, you'll always be willing to pay the price of redemption. Not only with money, but with your time, energy, submission, even your entire life. That's how many systems work. Political, religious, social. They offer you an image of perfection that doesn't exist, show you an ideal you'll never reach, then point out how far you fall short. And you, instead of rebelling, blame yourself. Instead of questioning, you shrink. Instead of breaking free, you punish yourself. Because guilt makes you feel you deserve what happens to you, that you're not enough, that you must compensate, repair, prove yourself. No matter how hard you've tried, how much you've given, how much you've endured, there always seems to be something you didn't do right. Something you could have done better. Something expected of you that you didn't fulfill. And in that constant judgment, you lose touch with your truth, your dignity, your peace. Guilt doesn't come alone. It feeds on the fear of rejection, the need for approval, the desire to be seen as good. That's why it's so effective. It strikes at the very core of what you most need: belonging. And when you believe you'll only be loved if you're perfect, you become a slave to that ideal, a slave you yourself sustain at the cost of your freedom. It's ironic, because sometimes you don't even know why you feel guilty. You just know there's a weight, a lingering unease even when everything seems fine. And if you stop to look, you'll find an inner voice insisting you're not doing enough, not being enough, that you should have acted differently, spoken differently, reacted differently. But that voice isn't yours. It was planted, sometimes by family, sometimes by religion, school, culture. It was built during an upbringing that taught you you'd only be loved if you were good, if you didn't cause trouble, if you never made mistakes. And over the years, that voice grew with you, becoming part of your inner dialogue. You confused it with your conscience, but it isn't. Conscience arises from love. Guilt arises from conditioning. The difference is enormous. Conscience helps you improve without harming you. Guilt imprisons you and repeats a lie until you believe it. And once you believe it, you'll do anything to be accepted, even betray yourself, even lead a life that isn't yours, just to fit into a mold someone else defined as right. Freeing yourself from guilt doesn't mean becoming irresponsible or justifying everything you do. It means no longer living under someone else's gaze, no longer punishing yourself for failing to be the idealized version of yourself that someone invented. It means beginning to trace the origin of that feeling, questioning whom you're obeying, recognizing which part of you is constantly seeking redemption as if you'd committed a crime. Emotional freedom begins when you can look at yourself with compassion even in your clumsiest moments. When you can say, "It wasn't perfect, but it was the best I knew how to do." When you understand that your worth doesn't vanish because you failed, that you don't have to compensate for your existence, that you owe nobody anything simply for being who you are. There are people who live apologizing for breathing, for bothering others, for having their own opinions. They say sorry before they speak. They blame themselves before they act. They walk around feeling they always owe something, as if taking up space were itself a fault. That's not humility. That's oppression disguised as modesty. Your life cannot be built on guilt, because then everything you do will be out of obligation, not choice. And what is done out of obligation doesn't free you. It only maintains a cage disguised as duty. If you feel free yet still watch yourself at every turn, if you smile yet inside you're exhausted from pretending, that's not freedom. That's an invisible cell. And that cell, like almost every emotional prison, has its key already in the lock. All you need is permission to step out. It won't be easy, because breaking free from guilt means defying every lesson you were taught. It means disappointing expectations. It means no longer asking permission to live as you need to live. But once you do it, the sensation of truth, relief, authenticity is priceless. Guilt has been the ultimate business model for centuries. But you didn't come here to sustain emotional enterprises. You came to awaken, to choose yourself, to walk with dignity, even if it means leaving behind the gazes that once made you feel less for being you. From now on, every time you feel guilt, before you surrender to it, pause. Ask yourself whether what you feel is true conscience or an ancient chain that no longer belongs to you. Chapter 8. Misunderstood forgiveness. Chains you. You've been told that forgiveness is noble, the path to inner peace, that if you don't forgive, you poison yourself. You've heard it so often, in so many trite phrases, that you ended up believing any emotion that doesn't fit that idealized version of forgiveness is a flaw, a sign that you haven't evolved enough, that you remain bound by resentment, that you don't know how to let go. What nobody explained is that some forms of forgiveness, far from freeing you, actually chain you tighter. When forgiveness becomes a moral obligation, when you're forced to let go before you've healed, when you're expected to understand someone who never had the courage to look you in the eye, that forgiveness isn't an act of love. It's a form of violence disguised as virtue. Another way of ignoring you, of minimizing what you felt, of imposing an artificial peace that only makes others comfortable while you crumble inside. Authentic forgiveness doesn't arise from obligation. It can't be forced or rushed. It isn't a spiritual trophy to prove you're good. It comes, if it comes, when you're ready. When you've journeyed through the wound, when you've cried enough, when you've screamed what you held in for years, when you no longer need the other person to understand because you've finally understood it yourself within. We confuse forgiveness with reconciliation. We've been led to believe that forgiving means reopening doors, restoring the bond, erasing what happened. But sometimes real forgiveness happens in silence, alone, without applause, without meetings. Sometimes true forgiveness is simply continuing on your path without hatred, but also without that forced need to justify the other person. Here's where many get lost. They say you must forgive to understand the other's reasons, that if you know their pain, you won't hurt at what they did. But understanding doesn't erase damage. Empathy doesn't eliminate scars. You can see another's misery, even feel compassion for it, and still recognize that what they did was unacceptable. That too is forgiveness. Not denying what happened, not sugarcoating it to fit some image of spirituality that isn't yours. Forgiveness isn't justification. It isn't minimization. It isn't pretending nothing happened. The kind of forgiveness that frees you doesn't demand you love the other more than you respect yourself. It allows you to let go of what binds you without forcing you to maintain ties that no longer deserve your energy. Often, forgiveness means closing a chapter without signing a truce. There's also the internal trap of self-forgiveness, that voice that shows up when you err, and instead of learning, you martyr yourself. When you fail, and instead of owning it, you punish yourself for weeks. You demand an impossible perfection, then blame yourself for not achieving it. You talk of forgiving yourself, but you never truly do. You grant only small reprieves, like letting a prisoner out to the yard for an hour before locking them up again. True self-forgiveness isn't indulgence. It's taking responsibility for what you did without turning it into an eternal sentence. It's acknowledging the harm, whether to yourself or others, and still deciding not to remain stuck at that point in your story. It's giving yourself the chance to do things differently, without the emotional whip you've wielded against yourself for years. That's why misunderstood forgiveness is so dangerous, because it doesn't free you, yet makes you believe it does, because it acts like a bandage that covers the wound without healing it. If you give it before you're ready, you betray yourself, and every time you do, your soul shrinks a little more. Not every act deserves forgiveness. Not every relationship should continue after forgiveness. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you someone who respects themselves, who doesn't confuse kindness with weakness, who has learned that inner peace doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means distance, boundaries, perhaps even permanent separation. When they tell you forgiveness is letting go, they're right. But letting go doesn't mean wiping your memory clean or losing your discernment or giving up your dignity. Letting go means no longer dragging pain at your side. It means no longer waiting for the other to understand, repair, or apologize, because they may never do so. And that's okay, because closure doesn't depend on them. It depends on you and your ability to decide not to give someone else more space in your life than they deserve. Don't confuse forgiveness with forgetting. Forgiving isn't erasing. It isn't numbing. It's remembering without the same ache. It's being able to look back without feeling stuck there. It's having traveled the emotional distance necessary to move forward without carrying that baggage in every step. And when you finally reach that place, when you forgive without pressure, expectations, or need for the other to know, something within you loosens. You breathe differently. You inhabit yourself differently. Because true forgiveness isn't for them. It's for you. For having carried something that was never entirely yours. If anyone ever told you that you had to forgive to be free, they were right. But they didn't tell you how. They didn't tell you that sometimes the path to forgiveness starts by feeling the rage, the disgust, the sadness, the helplessness. That you must make room for what hurts before dressing it up in pretty words. That you must allow yourself to hate, if necessary, so that you don't end up hating yourself for not being able to love at once. The trap of hurried forgiveness makes you skip stages. It takes you from wound to closure without processing what lies in between. And that's not evolution, it's avoidance. And what you avoid doesn't vanish. It lurks in your body, in your reactions, in your future relationships. Until one day, it explodes. That's why you must face the wound. Not to wallow in pain, but to understand it, honor your experience, reclaim what you lost by trying to be the right person. True forgiveness from the depths isn't a bright, luminous act. It's a courageous act, because it means slicing through yourself. It means acknowledging you were a victim, but also accepting responsibility for how you handle that pain. It means reclaiming your story without numbness or gloss. And from that place, choosing not to prove anything, but to truly free yourself. Chapter 9. You didn't come to obey. You came to awaken. Since childhood, you've been told that behaving well is correct, that obedience is a sign of maturity, that good children don't ask uncomfortable questions, that good believers don't question doctrine, that good citizens don't raise their voices. And you, wanting to belong, adapted. You shaped how you think, act, feel, not from freedom, but from fear of being singled out. You were applauded when you followed the rules. You were admired when you repeated the expected lines. You were rewarded for fitting in, for not causing trouble, for being what others needed you to be. You did it so well that you began to confuse obedience with virtue. You began to believe that living with your eyes closed was faith, that following the prescribed path was wisdom, that doubt made you dangerous. But there comes a moment, if you pay attention, when all that begins to make noise inside you. Something stirs, unsettles, rebels against every command you don't understand. Every "this is how it's done" that doesn't hold up, every duty that no longer feels right. And then you realize that blind obedience isn't evolution. It's anesthesia, a silent surrender of yourself. You didn't come into this world to be submissive. You came to think, to choose, to explore what it means to be you beyond what you were taught. You came to awaken from the collective hypnosis that repeats norms without knowing their origin, that carries on traditions out of inertia, that defends structures that sustain no one anymore. And awakening isn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's beginning to see with your own eyes. It's realizing that many of the ideas you held weren't yours, that you inherited them unfiltered, that you accepted them out of fear of being alone, rejected, disappointing those who loved you. But love isn't blind obedience, and being loved shouldn't require betraying yourself. Love that demands you dim your light isn't love. It's emotional domestication. And you weren't born to be domesticated. You were born to expand, to touch life with your own hands, to experience from your center, not from someone else's mold. True spirituality doesn't ask for submission. It doesn't demand automatic reverence. It doesn't turn you into a well-trained puppet. True spirituality unsettles you. It forces you to dismantle yourself, to question what you've always taken for granted, to release comfortable certainties and step into the wild terrain of your own consciousness. Because only there, where there are no manuals or easy answers, does real awakening begin. And it isn't comfortable, because it involves disappointing others, disobeying familial, cultural, religious mandates. It involves giving up approval, speaking up when you learn to remain silent. And there is a price for that. But there is an even higher price for continuing to obey a life that doesn't represent you. Awakening isn't shouting or breaking everything. It's starting to live with coherence. It's aligning your decisions with your truth, even if that truth annoys, isn't understood, or hurts. Because living asleep is following a script without asking why. And you didn't come here to play a part. You came to write your own story, with mistakes, stumbles, doubts, but with authenticity. The system you were born into doesn't need awakened people. It needs pieces that fit, that don't question, that produce, that consume, that repent just enough to stay on the wheel. That's why doubt is punished, obedience applauded, nonconformists pointed out. Because awakening is dangerous to those who profit from collective slumber. But awakening doesn't make you special or superior. It means taking responsibility for your thoughts, your choices, your boundaries. It means accepting that life owes you nothing, but offers you everything if you dare to show up fully. If you stop waiting for someone to tell you what to do. If you accept that your compass lies within, and no one else can calibrate it for you. For years you sought answers externally, in books, leaders, rituals, slogans promising certainty. And perhaps some of them helped you, supported you, moved you forward. But none of them can replace your inner voice. None of them holds the final word on your path. Because the sacredness isn't in the guide, it's in how you respond to what stirs you from within. Obedience may seem easier, less conflictual, more accepted. But that path only works if you're willing to pay with your essence, your unasked questions, your postponed desires, your ignored intuitions. And there comes a moment, if you're honest, when that price no longer makes sense, when apparent peace turns into noise, when comfort becomes a cage. That moment is the threshold, the exact point where you can choose to remain the acceptable version of yourself, or to begin being your real self. And there's no turning back once you cross it, because once you awaken, the world never looks the same. What you once tolerated now burns you. What you once accepted without thought now feels unbearable. And that doesn't make you difficult. It makes you alive. This chapter isn't meant to push you into conflict or turn you into some gladiator of spirituality. It's meant to remind you that your consciousness didn't arrive to remain asleep under borrowed norms. That your soul doesn't thrive in domesticity. That true growth isn't doing right according to others, but discovering what is true for you, even if it means disobeying what you were taught. Awakening is an intimate act. It isn't shouted or posted or imposed. It is lived, honored, defended in silence when you choose what you need even if no one understands. When you say no, even if your voice trembles. When you walk a different path, even if everyone else remains in line. Because you know that every step you take in your truth is a prayer that needs no temple. You didn't come here to obey without thinking. You came to remember yourself, to dismantle inherited ideas, to ask what truly nourishes you versus what merely keeps you still. You came to awaken. And though it may hurt, leave you without certainties, expose you, it's worth it, because living awake, with all it entails, is the only way to truly feel alive. Chapter 10. Spirituality without action is self-deception. Saying you believe in something greater, that you trust the universe, that you practice gratitude each morning, that you meditate, that you affirm, that you repeat uplifting phrases upon waking, all of that is fine. It can help. But if your spirituality remains theoretical, if it doesn't transform your actions, if it doesn't shape how you treat others, how you choose, how you relate, how you live, then it isn't spirituality. It's a comfortable fantasy. A kind of inner decor so you don't have to face the real changes your life is screaming for. Many talk of light, energy, awakening, soul connection, but still exploit employees, disdain anyone who thinks differently, use words like vibration while despising dissent. They attend workshops, buy crystals, pose in the perfect posture, yet at home they can't listen to their children. They say everything is connected but ignore the building's janitor. They preach self-love, yet berate themselves for every mistake. That isn't spirituality. It's makeup. And no matter how expensive, it won't change what's underneath. Believing, feeling, visualizing can be a first step. But if there's no action, no new decisions, no tangible consequences in your daily life, then what you're doing isn't a spiritual path. It's internal theater you use to avoid confronting what you fear to change. Because saying everything happens for a reason is easy when it doesn't require movement. Saying I trust the divine plan is comfortable when that plan doesn't obligate you to take responsibility for your present. Authentic spirituality isn't a comfort zone. It's an internal revolution visible in how you live, in how you respond when challenged, in how you handle power when it falls into your hands, in how you honor your word, your time, your body, in how you act when no one's watching, because that's the true measure of what you claim to believe. There is no greater contradiction than preaching awareness while repeating unconscious patterns, preaching peace while fueling conflict, asking for signs while ignoring the obvious, wishing for a different life while choosing the same routines day after day. Action isn't an accessory. It's the most honest mirror of your evolution. And you don't need grand gestures. No need to save the world, change countries, become a monk. Sometimes a small but consistent choice suffices. Stop calling someone who doesn't care for you. Say no where you once erred on the side of self-erasure. Listen with your body, not just your ears. Take seriously what you feel even if others don't understand. That is action. And that is embodied spirituality. Inner growth isn't measured by what you know, but by what you do with what you know. You may have read dozens of books, memorized profound concepts, but if your behavior doesn't reflect that depth, something isn't clicking. Because the hardest part isn't understanding. It's applying what you understand, especially when it's uncomfortable, breaks structures, leaves you without excuses. Real spirituality forces you to choose more consciously. It demands clarity, presence. It doesn't let you hide behind, I'm just like this. It doesn't allow you to play the victim. Because when you're truly awake, you know you can't keep blaming the past, your parents, the government, karma, or your star sign. You know the question isn't, why is this happening to me? But what am I doing with this? And yes, sometimes you'll not know what to do. Sometimes you'll freeze. Sometimes you'll choose wrong. But that's all part of the journey. The important thing is owning it, not slapping on a spiritual label to cover what you're afraid to face. Because that, no matter how lofty it sounds, is just a sophisticated lie. You'll feel it, an inner dissonance that erodes you. Part of you is ready to live differently, but another part is still tied to the old. That's where the constant tension lies, the endless search that never quite satisfies, the feeling of being on a path but not moving forward. You don't need more information, another course, a better grasp of chakras, planets, or energies. You need to start acting on the information you already have, to embody it. Because your body is sacred too. Your relationships matter too. Your daily life is the altar where everything you claim to feel is truly tested. The most spiritual thing you can do today might not be meditating. It might be having that overdue conversation, ending a relationship that no longer nourishes you, refusing to say yes out of fear, recommitting to your health, telling someone the truth, asking for help, or forgiving yourself without ceremony or ritual, just looking in the mirror and saying, "It wasn't perfect, but here I am." Spirituality that doesn't change you inside and out isn't spirituality. It's distraction, half-hearted comfort. And you didn't come here to comfort yourself. You came to live with integrity, to make every step count, to turn your beliefs into deeds, not decorations. It's not about being flawless. It's about being coherent, about ensuring your values aren't just words in a notebook, but choices that sustain you when everything shakes. About being the same person when you're alone as when you're in public. About letting your light shine not as rhetoric, but as the consequence of having dared to face your own darkness. When that happens, when you stop using spirituality as a refuge and start using it as fuel, everything changes. Life stops being theory, and you stop hiding behind pretty phrases to finally become someone who lives with soul and still keeps their feet firmly on the ground. Chapter 11. The questions you avoid are the ones that bring you closest to you. There are questions you don't ask yourself because somewhere deep in your consciousness, you know you couldn't remain the same if you answered honestly. They aren't complex questions. They don't require lofty degrees, advanced spirituality, or epic journeys. They're simple. And that's why they hurt, because they won't let you escape to the abstract. They ground you. They confront you. They place you face to face with yourself. What are you holding on to that you no longer want? Who do you keep calling out of habit? Which part of yourself have you had to hide just to fit in where you no longer belong? How much of your day is built on inertia? How many decisions do you make from fear rather than from conviction? You don't ask them because the answers wouldn't lead you to theorize. They would force you to act. And to act means risking loss. It means discomfort. It means breaking invisible loyalties you drag along without realizing it. Loyalties to your family, to your past, to the persona you built. Because we all construct one. A persona that holds up so long as you don't ask too many questions. One that works as long as you keep your mouth shut and your soul asleep. But when you begin to ask the questions no one taught you to ask, that persona starts to crack. And it doesn't feel like enlightenment. It feels like chaos, like confusion, like emptiness. Because when you stop being who you were to become who you are, there's a stretch of no man's land. A space between the old and the new, where you don't know who you are or where you're going. And that's scary. But it's also the door. You avoid those questions because you sense their power. Because if one day you dared to face head-on what you've been postponing, you'd have to leave behind a part of yourself you've used as a shield for years. You'd have to give up comfortable explanations, meaningless comforting phrases, and draining dynamics that nonetheless feel familiar. The questions you fear most aren't the ones that would make you doubt others. They're the ones that would make you doubt yourself, your motives, your choices, your internal narrative. Because in the end, the hardest thing isn't seeing what others do. The hardest thing is recognizing when you yourself are avoiding your truth for fear of what living it might entail. And yet, those questions carry a gift no pretty answer ever could. They bring you back to yourself, to that place where answers don't come from outside, where there are no manuals or gurus, only silence, intuition, and the possibility of seeing yourself without excuses. When you dare to ask sincerely, not to collect theories, but to spark real change, the soul responds, not with words, but with clarity, with a kind of inner direction that doesn't shout, but nudges, that offers no guarantees, but guides. And that clarity, though uncomfortable, is the beginning of a life built not from obligation, but from integrity. The most brutal part of this process is realizing just how much you already knew and didn't dare to accept. Because there is no important question whose answer you don't already sense. You know it. You've known it all along. You were simply not ready to live in coherence with what you knew. And so you buried it under obligations, noise, and goals that don't reflect you. But the soul never forgets. It only waits. Waits for you to stop distracting yourself, to grow tired of holding up the unsustainable, to get fed up with repeating a life that doesn't feel like yours. The questions you avoid are the ones that bring you closest to you, because they strip away the layers, leave you exposed, force you to examine, to dismantle inherited beliefs, to admit that you keep doing certain things simply because they're expected of you, because you've confused loyalty with resignation, because you keep paying emotional debts you never incurred. When you finally sit down and ask yourself seriously, something shifts. You may not act immediately. You may take time. But you can never fully go back to sleep. Because you've looked. And once you see, you can't pretend you didn't see. Sometimes the only thing you need to transform isn't another book, another piece of advice, another sign. It's one well-asked question, one that tears you a little, one that pulls you out of repetition, one that forces you to sit with yourself and say, "This stops now." And that's where everything begins. You don't need to answer it all today, but you do need to stop hiding from what you already know. Because as long as you keep avoiding the key questions, you'll keep living a life that doesn't feel whole. You'll move on the surface, but inside you'll remain paused. And that kind of life, even if it seems stable, even if it gives you a measure of security, won't fill you. It'll only entertain you just enough to keep you from screaming. If you truly want to get closer to yourself, stop repeating what you already know and start questioning what you've never dared to name. What parts of you are you denying so as not to cause discomfort? Which dreams are you postponing for fear of failure? Which decisions did you make by inertia and now defend as if they were truly yours? Whom are you blaming so you don't have to own what's yours to own? It's not about destroying everything. It's about stopping building on a foundation that doesn't belong to you. About daring to recognize what now makes no sense. About ceasing to justify what no longer resonates. Because there, at the exact point where you stop lying to yourself, freedom begins. It's not fast. It's not easy. But it's real. And the real, even when it hurts, always makes more sense than the facade. You're not here to follow a script others wrote for you. You're here to ask the questions that wake you up, to allow yourself to feel whatever comes with the answer, and from there, decide, not out of fear, not out of pressure, out of truth. Because when you ask the right question, you're already on your way. Chapter 12. The prayer no one ever taught you. You learned to pray on your knees, hands clasped, reciting words taught to you since childhood. You were told that prayer is talking to God, that it's a sacred act, used to ask, to give thanks, to seek forgiveness, to request more, to make promises. You were given formulas, some rhyming, others solemn, and taught to recite them with reverence, as if each word had to sound perfect to work. And without realizing it, you began to believe that only from within that rigid structure could you approach the divine. But no one taught you how to pray when you're broken inside. No one explained what to do with that urge to speak to something greater when you no longer have the strength even to kneel. When the words won't come, when you believe in nothing, when you don't know if you're praying or simply begging life for a reprieve. That prayer, the one born from the abyss, isn't in books. It isn't taught in catechism. It has no form, no rules. Yet it's probably the most honest of all. The prayer no one taught you begins when your soul shatters and you don't know what to do with the fragments. It doesn't sound pretty, but it resonates. It follows no formula, yet it feels true. It connects you to something beyond, not because you sound right, but because you're being yourself without disguise. It arises when you stop speaking to an idealized deity and instead speak to something that hears you, even when you no longer believe you deserve to be heard. Praying isn't about repeating perfect phrases. Praying is daring to say what you truly feel, even if it includes rage, disappointment, sadness, resentment, even if admitting what you're saying hurts. Because God, or the universe, or energy, or whatever stands for divine to you, doesn't need your perfection. It needs your truth, your presence, your unfiltered voice. You've spent your life thinking prayer happens at set times, in special places, with elegant words. And so you believe you don't know how to pray, because you can't make it sound like it should. But you do know how. Anyone who's ever felt their soul overflow in silence, in solitude, in the middle of a long night, already knows what it means to pray, even if they don't call it that or understand it that way. The prayer no one taught you is that moment when you take a deep breath and decide not to give up. It hides in a please and help me understand, and I don't know what to do with this. It needs no temple, no incense. It happens while you wash dishes, stare at the ceiling, wander without aim, eyes moist and throat tight. No, you won't always get a clear answer. Nothing magical always occurs. Sometimes nothing changes externally, but something always shifts inside. Something settles. Something listens. Something acknowledges. Because sometimes what you need most isn't resolution. It's that someone, anything, knows what you feel. That you're not carrying it alone. True prayer isn't an exchange. It's not a bargain with the divine. It's not, I promise this if you give me that. It's not currency. It's an offering, an opening, an emotional nakedness where you stop playing strong and allow yourself just for a moment to be purely human. And yes, you can ask. You can vent. You can scream if necessary. You can cry out every burden you carry. But not because you must adopt the right posture, but because you need to. Because when you pray from your depths, you align with something more honest than any dogma, yourself. And from there, everything that happens begins to shift. Perhaps not more easily, but more genuinely. Don't confuse prayer with obedience. Don't confuse prayer with passive surrender. Praying isn't letting everything happen unchallenged. Praying is engaging, being present, holding your life with the humility of someone who doesn't have all the answers, but still refuses to stay silent inside. The prayer no one taught you doesn't seek divine favor, but seeks an encounter with yourself amid chaos. It expects no reward, yet becomes refuge. It isn't repeated, yet remembered, because some words never fade. Like that day you said, I can't go on. And though no voice answered out loud, you knew something held you. That prayer doesn't appear in books. It has no set hour. It needs no specific language, but it wields the power to transform you, because it reconnects you with your truth, reminds you that part of you remains intact, even as everything else seems to crumble. And that place, call it soul, consciousness, spirit, whatever, only awakens when you stop performing. When you stop trying to be the model student of spirituality. When you stop repeating what you're supposed to feel and simply feel, just as you are, with contradictions, doubts, scars, everything. Maybe it's time to relearn how to pray. Not as you were told, not from obligation, not from fear, but from intimacy, from that inner tremor, from the silence in which you finally permit yourself to ask without bargaining your worth, because that too is prayer, speaking to yourself unfiltered, with tenderness and the courage of someone who no longer needs pretenses to be heard. And if today you feel disconnected, if you believe you don't know how to start again, try saying something simple, something your own, something real. It doesn't matter how it sounds or if anyone understands. If it's sincere, it's enough. Because the prayer no one taught you isn't the one that sounds right. It's the one born from the bottom. And there, in that depth, someone is always listening. Even if they have no name, even if they have no form, even if it's just you. Chapter 13. Break free from the idea of punishment. Long before you learned to think for yourself, you already knew what punishment was. You didn't understand it in words, but you felt it in your body, in that look that froze you when you did something wrong, in that silence heavier than any shout, in that sense of having failed, of having crossed an invisible line you didn't know existed yet, somehow did. That's how you learned that bad behavior has consequences, that mistakes carry a price, that disobedience not only provokes conflict, but deserves condemnation. And from there, the idea of punishment became an emotional code you've carried through life. You learned to feel bad whenever you did something incorrect, not because you understood it intrinsically, but because you feared the external reaction, because you knew something would follow, a physical, emotional, or spiritual punishment, to let you know you'd failed, that you were guilty, that you didn't deserve peace. But the real problem wasn't experiencing consequences. The problem was that you began to believe everything bad that happens to you is, at its core, punishment. As if life kept score of your errors. As if a cosmic judge was taking notes, ready to return your decisions to you in the form of misfortune. And that idea, so ancient, so accepted, still operates in you today, often unconsciously. Because you've been taught that if you suffer, it's because you did something wrong. That if things go badly, it's because you didn't learn your lesson. That if something falls apart, it's because you didn't obey. And that turns you into a suspect in your own life, making you doubt even your best efforts. Making you feel you deserve every fall, every loss, every hardship, as if it were penance you had to pay. Breaking free from that logic is uncomfortable, because it dismantles a mental structure that offers the illusion of control. Because believing that everything that happens is punishment gives you an explanation, even a painful one. It tells you everything has meaning, everything fits. But it also locks you in, because if everything is punishment, you're never truly free. There's always hidden guilt, always something you could have done better, always an outstanding debt. Life doesn't punish. Life reveals, reflects, teaches. Not as a judge, but as a mirror. Not as an external authority, but as an internal opportunity. Things don't happen to punish you. They happen because you're on a path of growth, and growth involves going through processes that aren't always gentle. But experiencing hardship and believing you deserve it as punishment are two very different things. And no, not everything has a mystical explanation. Not everything is karma. Not everything is a test. Sometimes things just happen, because life has its chaos, its randomness. Believing everything ties back to something you did or didn't do can become a trap, because then you don't allow yourself to rest. You don't allow yourself to make mistakes. You don't allow yourself to grieve without feeling you're paying some secret debt that began long ago. This idea of punishment runs so deep that even when something good happens, you mistrust it. You expect something bad to come and balance the scales, as if you can't simply enjoy, as if happiness were suspicious, as if abundance had to be paid for with suffering, and that, though it sounds spiritual, isn't. It's emotional programming. It's inherited trauma. It's a way of living small, waiting for the blow, even when no one's raised their hand. Freeing yourself from this notion doesn't mean denying responsibility. It means realizing that mistakes aren't crimes, that being wrong doesn't make you less, that failing doesn't trigger automatic punishment, that not every pain is a consequence of wrongdoing. Sometimes you're simply learning. And real learning includes dark moments. You have the right to make mistakes without self-flagellation. You have the right to change without paying for everything you once were. You have the right to begin again without dragging an eternal record of guilt. Because you're not a file in a spiritual system. You're a person doing your best with the life you've got. And that alone entitles you to compassion. Letting go of punishment as life's default response doesn't make you irresponsible. It means relating to yourself from a new place, understanding, emotional maturity, humility, and acknowledging you're learning all the time. That there's no perfect version of you must reach before you stop suffering. That suffering isn't currency. You're not paying for anything. You're growing. And when you truly grasp that, everything changes. Not because you stop feeling pain, but because pain no longer makes you feel guilty. You no longer live it as a sentence, but as an experience you can traverse without destroying yourself inside. You no longer punish yourself for feeling. You no longer hunt yourself for having failed. You accompany yourself. You support yourself. You talk to yourself from kindness. That's the real change. Not in what happens to you, but in how you explain it to yourself. How you treat yourself in the process. How you rise afterward without adding unnecessary weight. You're not here to pay for anything. You're here to live, to grow, to break free from beliefs that shrank you, to dare to see life without fearing that every step is evaluated by a force waiting to strike. That's not faith. It's fear. And you didn't come to live in fear. You came to understand, to learn, to let go of the inner whip, to break free from the idea that if something hurts, you deserve it. Because some pains teach nothing, but do let you know yourself better. Some moments defy explanation but still open you up. And there are days when you can't go on, and yet you deserve rest, tenderness, and forgiveness, not for what you did, but for who you are. Chapter 14. You don't lack faith. You lack coherence. You don't need more faith. You don't need another self-help book of affirmations, nor to chant mantras 10 times a day, nor to keep convincing yourself the universe hears you. Deep down, you already know. You felt that formless certainty that sustained you when no one else could. You don't lack faith. You lack the courage to act in alignment with what you claim to believe. And that's the real turning point. You speak of trust but freeze at every change. You say everything has a purpose but despair whenever things deviate from your plan. You claim to believe in the unseen but cling to the safe, even when it hurts. It's not that you don't believe. It's that you don't live as if you do. And that's where the circuit breaks. Not because life fails to respond, but because you send mixed signals. On one hand, you expect miracles. On the other, you act from fear. This inner inconsistency isn't random. It's the result of years of living from duty, from what others will think, from guilt. It's what happens when your soul wants to move forward, but your mind demands guarantees. When your heart pushes you down a path and you turn back because you lack proof. But faith doesn't need proof. It needs conviction, and conviction only holds through action. There's no use in believing in abundance if you keep choosing relationships that leave you wanting. It makes no sense to repeat that everything is energy, if every day you give your time to what drains you. It's incoherent to talk about growth if you refuse to let go of what no longer fits. Spirituality isn't measured by what you say out loud. It's measured by the choices you make when no one's watching. Inconsistency not only distances you from what you desire, it exhausts you. Sustaining an image that conflicts with your true feelings consumes enormous energy. It wears you down to pretend everything's fine when inside you know something's wrong. And the more you force yourself to act against your soul's needs, the more you feel out of place. And when that happens, it's not that you lost faith. It's that you're betraying yourself. Belief isn't enough if you don't dare to act accordingly. And that doesn't mean reckless leaps into the void. It means stopping the wait for perfect conditions to start being who you already know you are. Because as long as you hide behind empty phrases, repeating "I trust" without moving, what you're doing isn't trust, it's procrastination. Postponing a more coherent life out of fear of losing what no longer works. That's what really breaks you. Because your soul can't flourish where every decision contradicts your truth. You can mask it with forced gratitude, hide it with automatic optimism, but inconsistency has a price. You feel it in your body, in insomnia, in anxiety, in that knot that never loosens. And the longer you pretend, the tighter it binds. Authentic faith isn't a declaration. It's a daily practice. It's that moment when you say no even if your voice shakes. When you choose the hard path because you know the easy one no longer fits. When you stop explaining your process and start living it with integrity. That's where coherence begins. And when you live from that place, you don't need signs. Everything falls into place. Not because everything magically improves, but because you stop sabotaging yourself. There's no greater magic than a person aligned with their truth. They don't need to convince anyone. They don't need to prove anything. It shows in how they move, in how they choose, in how they set boundaries, in how they say yes when they mean yes and no when they mean no. Such a person may feel fear, may have doubts, but they never betray themselves. And that's why their faith is real. Not because they say so, but because you can see it. Perhaps that's why you're tired. Because you know what you say you believe doesn't reflect in your life. Because you sense you're repeating a speech that sounds good, but doesn't represent you. And that isn't a lack of faith. It's a lack of coherence. It's fear of admitting that if you truly lived as you believe, many things would have to change. And that implies losses, farewells, letting go of versions of yourself you no longer wish to inhabit. But it also brings peace. The peace that doesn't come from everything being perfect, but from knowing at least you're not lying to yourself. That you're not sustaining draining ties out of habit. That you're not working at something you hate out of fear of emptiness. That you're not building a life that looks good from the outside but feels hollow inside. Faith isn't waiting for everything to change. It's you changing. It's choosing yourself even without all the answers. It's accepting that coherence may not bring immediate comfort, but grants an inner strength no external source can match. Because when what you think, feel, and do begin to align, there's no room for self-deception. And that is freedom. You don't need more theory. You don't need to repeat "the universe conspires." You need to stop conspiring against yourself. You need to ask if the life you're living reflects the faith you claim to have. And if it doesn't, you need the courage to start adjusting it. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but firmly. Because there's no prayer more powerful than a coherent decision. No affirmation more potent than an act honoring your truth. And no faith more real than the one visible in your steps, not in your words. Chapter 15. God isn't far away. He's uncomfortable in your way of living. It's not that God isn't there. It's not that he's gone or has forgotten you or is too busy with other souls. What happens is that you've carried him into a life that doesn't leave room for him. You've dragged him through every empty routine, mentioned him in speeches yet omitted him in decisions, invoked him in hardship only to sideline him when you chose unconsciously. And now you feel he's distant, when in reality, he's uncomfortable. Because it's not about whether you believe in him. Most people do, each in their own words, with their own fears and doubts. But belief isn't enough when it's backed by a life that contradicts what you claim to venerate. You can't speak of faith and act in betrayal of yourself. You can't ask for divine guidance and then ignore that inner voice that's been telling you to stop, to change, to stop lying to yourself. God doesn't step back. You're the one who puts him on display. ornamental in your existence. You use his name to start the day, to end the night, to justify what you choose and what you avoid. But you don't let him into your relationships, your work, the way you treat the barista, how you spend your time, your body, your attention. And that's why, even though you repeat that you believe, you feel an emptiness. God isn't distant. He's there, but tucked away among your justifications, smothered by the autopilot rhythm you live, silenced by the volume of your fear, watching you repeat the same patterns while you tell him you trust. It's not that he doesn't hear you. It's that you're not making space for something different to occur. You speak of him, name him, pin him to your convictions, but you won't let him act in the everyday, because that would force you to question yourself. To admit the chaos you sustain isn't inevitable. That many choices you make aren't part of a divine plan, but your own decisions. That not everything that happens carries a lesson. Sometimes you're simply out of sync. And that realization is uncomfortable. You think you lack faith, but what you lack is honesty. Honesty to admit you're not living as someone who believes in something greater. To accept you've constructed a user-friendly version of spirituality that lets you claim connection without changing anything at your core. Because talking about God is easy. The hard part is making room in your life for that energy to move. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean sainthood. It doesn't mean never making mistakes or behaving with solemnity. It means aligning your thoughts, actions, and feelings. It means not invoking God only when you need a miracle, but also when you make a difficult choice, when you decide whom to love, when you determine how much you respect yourself. God isn't uncomfortable because you don't love him. He's uncomfortable because you use his name to bless a life you don't truly inhabit with soul, because you keep asking for peace without ending your inner war, because you ask for signs and then ignore them, because you give thanks but won't let go, because you pray for change without changing yourself. And this isn't about guilt, nor punishment, nor about living under constant scrutiny. It's about realizing that the disconnection you feel isn't external. It isn't God's silence. It's your noise. Your life built without genuine space for the sacred. No amount of charms or perfect rituals matters. If your actions don't mirror your beliefs, your faith is trapped on your lips, not in your deeds. Once you see this, you can begin to rebuild the bond. Not with longer prayers, not with perfect ceremonies, but with presence, with awareness, with choices that declare, I know what I'm doing, and I do it from my truth. That's when God breathes, because he's no longer mere decoration. He's in the scene, in your choices, in your responses, in what you build. True spirituality isn't an image, it's a consequence. You see it in how you speak to strangers, how you speak to yourself when you fail, whether your word holds weight, whether your relationships are honest, whether you rise with dignity when life knocks you down. You don't need to say, God is with me. It shows when he is. And this isn't about religion, titles, or external codes. It's about inner coherence, about no longer using spirituality as an emotional shield, but living it as an intimate language, a way of being in the world, a way of looking at others without judgment, looking at yourself without pretense, acting knowing there's something beyond, yet right here. God doesn't demand perfection, but he does ask for presence. He asks you not to say you trust if every step you take is governed by fear, not to speak of faith if you don't practice it when uncertainty arrives, not to claim that his will is perfect if you complain about every unexpected turn, not for his sake, but yours. Because living in inconsistency doesn't just rob you of purpose, it tears you apart from within. The good news is, you don't need to overhaul your life overnight. You just need to start making space for him. To ask yourself, with brutal honesty, whether God would have room in your schedule, your emotional calendar, your routines, in the concrete, in the everyday, in the real. Because if he wouldn't, he's not far away. He's locked up. And he didn't come to be locked in your words. He came to move with you, to breathe with you, to stumble beside you if need be, but to be with you, truly, not with your edited version. So before you say you've lost the connection, ask yourself if the life you're leading leaves room for the divine, not in theory but in practice, in the everyday, in reality. Because if he can't express himself there, it's not God who's absent. Chapter 16. Your hell isn't eternal. It's the one you sustain every day. There are people who walk through life convinced they're condemned. They don't say it aloud. Sometimes they aren't even fully aware of it. But they feel it. They carry it. They live it. As if they bore an invisible sentence that keeps them from breathing easy, as if they're paying for a mistake they can't even recall making. And so, unconsciously, they turn routine into penance, relationships into punishment, each day into a test they must pass, just to avoid collapsing entirely. They call it karma, bad luck, destiny. But it's something else. It's a hell they sustain, not imposed by the universe, not by God, not by a cosmic judge, but by themselves. You're not trapped in condemnation. You're repeating a cycle so familiar, it has become your identity. You wake up under the same weight, repeat the same thoughts, choose the same people, fall into the same holes, justify what hurts because you no longer know what living without it would be like. You've grown accustomed to chaos as if it were part of your skin, as if you deserved it, as if there were no other option. But there is another option, one you can't see while you're feeding the fire. No one wakes up one day saying, "I'm going to build my own hell." Yet you do, little by little, with each renunciation of what you need, each swallowed silence, each postponed decision, each toxic tie you maintain out of fear, each truth you hide to avoid discomfort, each broken promise to yourself you let slide as if it were nothing. Your hell isn't the product of a single act. It's the accumulation of daily betrayals, everything you keep silent when you should speak, everything you tolerate when you should walk away, everything you do by habit, even when it suffocates you. And that kind of hell is the hardest to spot, because it's neither blazing nor filled with screams. It's quieter, more elegant, more camouflaged. You dress it up as routine. You hide it behind responsibilities. You justify it with learned phrases. That's just life. I have no choice. That's how things are. And you believe it, because telling the truth would force you to act. It would force you to leave. And leaving hurts. Because breaking from what you know, even when it destroys you, means letting go of a part of yourself you built to survive. But if you don't do it, no one else will. Because that hell, even if you didn't choose it consciously, is yours. You sustain it with your fear, your excuses, your most resigned self. And as long as you deny it, as long as you think it's something that befell you, from the past, from fate, from chance, you won't claim the one fact that matters. You can stop feeding it. Not all at once. Not with empty slogans. Not with magic. With presence. With responsibility. With the decision to stop justifying what no longer serves you. With the humility to admit you're lost, but not gone. You're here, breathing, listening, with the genuine possibility of beginning to change how you speak to yourself, how you relate, how you choose. Sometimes hell doesn't end. It simply stops being nourished. Because some pains don't heal through understanding but through boundaries. Some wounds don't close through explanation but through distance. Some burdens ease not with faith, but with movement. And as long as you wait for something out there to rescue you, you'll reinforce the belief you're powerless to help yourself. But you can help yourself. You can start saying no when something doesn't uplift you. You can stop dressing dependence as stability. You can look squarely at that corner of your life where you keep repeating a pattern that's no longer tenable. You can stop protecting those who drain you simply because you fear being alone. You don't need everything to improve tomorrow. You need honesty with yourself today. Because as long as you look away, minimize your pain, or give it fancy names to disguise what is simply self-abandonment, you'll keep walking in circles within your own fire. The hell you inhabit isn't eternal. But as long as you normalize it, it will be. Not because you deserve it, not because fate decreed it, but because you grew used to it. And what becomes habit ends up feeling like truth. That's why the first step isn't escape. It's observation, seeing clearly what's happening, recognizing it, refusing to deny it or justify it. And then, when you see it in full clarity, when you can no longer pretend ignorance, you'll have to decide. Remain in that version of life that barely sustains your soul, or begin, however clumsily, to build one that restores your right to breathe in peace. Not perfect, not ideal, but yours. Honest, occupied. No one else can do that work for you, but no one can take it away either. And that, though it scares you, is also freedom. Because if you were able to sustain for so long a life that didn't serve you, you're just as capable of building one that does, even without all the answers, with a trembling body, unsure of where to begin. Start from where you are, from that small decision you've been postponing, from that truth you need to speak, even if it unsettles, from that boundary you never set and can no longer ignore. And you'll see how little by little the hell fades, not because it disappears magically, but because you stop being the one who feeds it. Chapter 16. Your hell is not eternal. It's the one you sustain every day. You are not condemned, but you appear so, walking with your head bowed, shoulders tense, and your soul asleep, as if someone, or something, had passed down a perpetual sentence. Not with words, of course, but with experiences, with unhealed wounds, with accumulated silences that became routine. And now, without quite knowing when it began, you live inside a fire you yourself stoke every morning. It's not hell that comes to you. You are the one who sustains it. Because that pain that accompanies you, that constant feeling of merely surviving instead of living, isn't divine punishment nor familial inheritance. It's an invisible construct built from the decisions you dare not make, from bonds you keep out of inertia, from broken promises you continue burying beneath the carpet of what's urgent. And the most tragic part isn't that you maintain it. It's that you believe it's normal. You've grown used to carrying a weight that isn't yours to bear, to justifying emotional fatigue by calling it maturity, to staying where you cannot bloom because that's life, to remaining where you're broken because something is better than nothing, and to silencing what's killing you inside because others have it worse. But no, your hell is not noble. It's silent. It's polite. It tells you to endure, not to make a fuss, not to bother anyone, to be grateful even as you drain, and you, so as not to break anything, end up breaking entirely. Every time you choose to stay in a place where you can no longer breathe, every time you silence what's consuming you so you won't inconvenience others, every time you prioritize a facade of stability at the cost of your mental health, you feed the fire. Not the one outside, but the one inside. The one that doesn't scream yet burns. That isn't seen yet hurts. Your hell has no horns or chains. It has excuses, routines, masks that have fused with your skin. Phrases like, "It is what it is. I've gotten used to it. I don't want to start from scratch. I don't know who I am without this." And so day after day, you build a life so full of justifications that there's no room left for your soul. And this isn't about blaming you or feeling bad for not seeing it before. It's about opening your eyes now, recognizing that there's a vast difference between what you live and what you deserve. That enduring is not maturing, that resignation is not spirituality, that silence is not peace. Hell is not eternal, but it is persistent. It stays as long as you keep it standing, as long as you keep saying yes when your body screams no, as long as you betray yourself in the small things, hoping someone out there will save you in the big ones. But no one will come, because they cannot, because they don't know, because they can't even imagine the fire inside you, because you hide it so well. And you do it out of fear. Fear of loss, of change, of rejection, of emptiness. Fear of seeing yourself without what is hurting you today, yet still defines you. Because sometimes letting go of hell is scarier than staying in it. At least in hell you know how it works. You know where it burns the most, what parts to avoid, how to breathe without burning completely. But that is not life. It is survival. And you didn't come to survive. You came to exist. You don't need to extinguish every flame today. But you do need to stop feeding it. One decision at a time. One truth spoken with a trembling voice. One step toward yourself. Even if it's clumsy. Even if it hurts. Even if you're not sure what's on the other side. What's there is air, and you need it. Breaking with hell isn't dramatic. It's every day. It's refusing to reply to messages that drain you. It's saying no firmly, without justifying yourself. It's going to bed one night knowing that today you didn't betray yourself, if only a little. It's coming back to you, and it won't be comfortable, because freedom never is at first. Because after living so long from the wound, healing feels like betrayal. But it isn't. It's justice. The hell you carry isn't eternal. It's familiar, and you can leave it behind. Not all at once, but every time you choose something that brings you closer to who you really are. Every time you choose to take a deep breath instead of fleeing. Every time you say enough. Because what burns you is not life. It's the character you created to survive in it. And you are not that character. Chapter 17. What you inherited is not your destiny. You were born with an invisible backpack already loaded. You didn't choose it. It was placed on you the moment you arrived. Inside were beliefs, fears, loyalties, ancient guilt, silences that have circled for generations, unexamined patterns of behavior, and wounds that were never yours, yet you still carry them. They told you how to love, how to suffer, how to live. And they spoke from their own histories, their own lacks, their own scars, perhaps with good intentions, but not with clarity. For many who shaped you never stopped to ask why they repeated what they repeated. They just passed the baton. And you took it without knowing that the baton had barbs. And so you learned that love hurts, that constant effort gives you value, that strength is never crying, that sacrifice makes you a better person, that you don't deserve more than you have, that settling is maturity, that guilt is a sign of conscience, that obedience is safer than creation, that dreaming is naive, and that breaking the norm is ingratitude. But is all of that really yours? Or do you drag it simply because no one dared to let it go before you? What you inherited is not your destiny. It's your starting point. And if you don't question it, it becomes a prison you act out on autopilot. A poorly written script you perform without realizing. Because if you don't make the cut, if you don't set a boundary between what comes from the past and what you wish to build, you end up an echo, not a voice. There are those who live their whole lives believing they're being true to their family, when in reality they're betraying their own souls. Because they confused loyalty with repeating the same mistakes. Because they thought honoring their lineage meant perpetuating its chains. But no, true honor is healing what they couldn't, not continuing the same story. And this isn't about blaming anyone. It's about looking honestly, saying, this served me, and this didn't. I respect this, but I don't choose it. I appreciate that, but I don't embody it. Yes, you can be the one who severs the harmful narrative. You can be the turning point, the one who ends the lineage of guilt, the mandate of fear, the chain of silences. Of course it hurts. Of course it costs. Because part of you believes that if you change, you betray them. That if you grow, you leave them behind. That if you forge your own path, you become ungrateful. But that is not true. That is programming. The ghost of a culture that glorifies sacrifice and punishes authenticity. And if you wait for permission from those who never dared, you'll be waiting your whole life. Because permission comes from no one but yourself. Every time you choose to heal a pattern passed down by your parents, every time you name what your grandmother couldn't speak, every time you look with compassion but decide with firmness, every time you understand where pain comes from, but refuse to make it your fate. What you inherited influences you, yes, but does not determine you. And if you don't transform it, you will transmit it, even if you don't mean to, even if you're unaware. That's why it's so crucial to pause and examine. This stage of the journey isn't decorative. It's pivotal. Here you decide whether to follow the old line or redraw it. Many never advance because they're emotionally tied to ghosts long gone, to phrases repeated in childhood, to judging looks that didn't understand, to commands from an era that no longer exists. And they carry this weight as if it were sacred, afraid to let go, as if loss meant losing identity. But you didn't come to lug around inherited burdens. You came to build your own, with your own stones, with your own wins and mistakes. You came to release the accumulated weight so that those who follow you don't have to start so low. And that, even if no one acknowledges it, is an act of profound love. Because loving your history doesn't mean repeating it. It means facing it honestly, embracing its value, and releasing what bled you. It means forgiving what you can, repairing what's possible, and continuing where others stopped. It means looking back without getting trapped there. Your life isn't written. Your lineage is not a sentence. Your parents are not your destiny. Your childhood doesn't imprison you. Your traumas are not eternal. Your surname doesn't define your path. And most importantly, your freedom is not disrespect. It's consciousness. If you've made it this far, it's no coincidence. It's because something inside you no longer wants to replay the past. That no longer wants to live by default. That already understands that breaking patterns isn't selfish, it's evolution, and that the greatest fidelity you can have is to yourself. So start observing with a magnifying glass. Review what you say without thinking. Notice your automatic reactions. Ask where they come from, what story they repeat, and whether that story still deserves space in your life. Because every conscious choice deactivates a link, and every time you dare to live from yourself, your lineage breathes. You are not the end of a broken chain. You are the beginning of a free story. Chapter 18. Shame as an invisible punishment. Shame is a silent sentence. It doesn't shout. It doesn't hit. You can't see it. Yet it shrinks you inside. It limits you. It changes your posture, your voice, your choices. It doesn't originate from you, though you carry it as if it were yours. It's a judgment implanted that you learned to impose on yourself before anyone else did. From childhood, you were taught which parts of you weren't correct, which things to hide, which emotions were inappropriate, which desires were ugly, which mistakes were unforgivable. Not with exact words, but with looks, silences, mockery, punishments, gestures etched deeper than any shout. And so you learned that showing your true self could be dangerous. You began choosing carefully what to reveal and what to conceal, which version of yourself deserved love, and which version had to stay in the dark. Unconsciously, shame became your most faithful shadow, appearing whenever you err, whenever you cry, whenever you doubt, whenever you desire something you shouldn't, whenever you compare yourself and feel inadequate. And the worst part isn't feeling it, it's believing it. You start to think there's something wrong with you, that your essence is flawed, that if others knew what you truly feel or think, they'd walk away. And thus the mask is born. False perfection. The smile that hides discomfort. The silence that stifles anger. The compliance that conceals fear. The character who seems to have it all together, while inside, they drown. Shame doesn't protect you. It isolates you. It clips your wings. It turns you into your own jailer. Because once something inside you is marked as shameful, you do everything possible to hide it, even from yourself. And that means you can never be fully present, since you're always calculating, controlling, fearing. And do you know the most perverse thing of all? Shame is highly profitable. It's used to mold you, to make you fit in, to keep you from rocking the boat, to make you follow a script that suits others. Someone ashamed of their body, their voice, their desire, their past, is an easy person to manipulate because they walk around apologizing for simply existing. That's why I repeat, shame is not born from you. It was implanted, induced, taught. No one arrives in this world feeling like a mistake. You learn it, absorb it, normalize it, and carry it for years as if it were a cross you deserved. What makes this even more damaging is that shame often comes disguised as love. You're corrected for your own good. You're limited so you'll fit in. You're shamed because they care. And that double message breaks you inside, because you confuse repression with affection and end up believing you only deserve love if you hide who you are. But there comes a point in life when, if you truly want freedom, you must face what you were taught to hide. You have to descend to the emotional basement where you locked away everything once judged. Open that box you never wanted to revisit, and look inside with compassion, not to play the victim, not to justify yourself, but to understand, to release, to reclaim the parts of you buried out of fear of not being loved. It's not easy, because the first thing that greets you when you open that box is more shame. That echo repeating, "You shouldn't feel this. It's wrong to think that. How could you do that?" But if you push through that noise, if you don't retreat, you discover something deeper. Your humanity. Because shame is a lie that separates you from others. It convinces you that you alone carry it, that everyone else is normal, and you are the odd one out. But in truth, we all have wounds. All have done things we're not proud of. All sometimes feel we're not enough. And it's in this shared truth that liberation begins. The goal isn't to eliminate shame. It's to stop believing it, to stop acting from it, to speak even when you tremble, to show yourself even when it hurts, to declare "this is me" without apology, to meet another's gaze without hiding your cracks. The more you hide, the larger the monster grows. The more you name it, the more it dissolves. Shame cannot survive in the light. It needs silence, secrets, darkness. When you decide to speak from what you've hidden, without drama or justification, something breaks, and in that break, air rushes in. You didn't come to this world to pretend perfection. You came to experience, to err, to learn. And that includes failing, doubting, changing your mind. saying things you later regret, feeling uncomfortable emotions, making mistakes. That is human. The other, demanding permanent purity, is a cage you shouldn't inhabit. True strength isn't flawless, it's being real. And real isn't perfect, it's coherent. It means no longer betraying yourself for applause. It means your steps align with your truth. Yes, there may be parts of your past you wish you could erase, but you can't change who you were. You can change what you do with it today. You can look back without hatred, without judgment, without guilt. You can embrace the you who fell, who got lost, who hurt others, and say, "Stop hiding. Come, let's walk together." Because everything you are, even what shames you most, deserves compassion. Not to justify, but to integrate. Not to stay stuck in the wound, but to build something new from it. Shame only holds power when you feed it with silence. When you choose to speak, to show, to heal, it loses strength. And what remains is what was there all along. Your soul, your dignity, your intact worth. Chapter 19. The spirit is not above. It's in how you treat others. For far too long you've been taught to seek God by lifting your gaze, raising your hands, closing your eyes, and repeating memorized words, as if the heavens were somewhere up there, distant, unreachable, suspended in an invisible dimension where the sacred resides. But the truly sacred needs neither distance, nor mystery, nor a manual. It's here, in how you speak, in how you look, in how you treat someone who cannot repay you. Spirituality isn't discourse, it's action. It's not measured by how many times you chant a mantra or by what you post on Sundays. It's measured by how you respond when there's no applause. When someone errs and you could judge, but choose to understand. When someone stumbles and, rather than feeling superior, you offer a silent hand. Want to know if you're connected to the divine? Notice how you treat those who serve you no purpose, who inconvenience you, who annoy you. That's the true altar, the real temple, where spirit or empty virtue is revealed. Many live a double spiritual life, one for show, another in private. Outwardly, they radiate light. At home, they mistreat or ignore. Publicly, they smile, while inside they nurse an arrogance in the guise of moral superiority. And most of the time, it's not out of malice, but habit, because no one told them that real spirituality isn't demonstrated, it's practiced. And it's practiced especially when you face what challenges you most. Spirit is not a mystical entity floating among candles. Spirit is a constant attitude. It's what you choose when you're tired, frustrated, or disappointed. When you have every right to be selfish, but choose not to be. And no, this isn't about martyrdom or self-sacrifice at every turn. It's about coherence. You cannot claim belief in unconditional love and then mistreat anyone who doesn't fit your worldview. You cannot preach compassion while condemning those who haven't awakened yet. Otherwise, your spirituality becomes yet another mask, helpful for feeling superior but empty of real transformation. The divine hides behind no rituals. It shows up when you stop reacting from your wounds, when you breathe before exploding, when you choose understanding over control. And this is not easy. It demands a presence you don't learn from books or lectures. It's forged, and often painful, because it forces you to release the notion of always being right. You may have met people who never utter a religious word yet emanate a palpable presence. They listen without hurry. They don't interrupt. They don't impose. They don't boast. They live their faith without advertising it, because the soul's presence needs no promotion. And you've also seen the opposite, those who preach, teach, advise, yet treat loved ones like objects, who demand respect while humiliating, who ask for understanding without offering it. And there you realize that spiritual level isn't measured by how much you know. but by how you live. If you're kind only to those you like, that's not virtue, that's convenience. If you help only when it suits you, that's not compassion, that's calculation. The real test comes when you don't feel like it, when you'd rather close off, and yet choose to open a little more. We're not here to collect concepts. We're here to learn mature love, to respect even when we don't understand, to accompany without trying to change the other. And that is as difficult as it is revolutionary. Spirit isn't up there. It's in the gesture you extend to someone who disappointed you, in how you correct without humiliating, in how you apologize without justifying, in how you look at someone lost without assuming the role of savior. Because nobody has the complete map. We're all just relearning along the way. And that revelation happens in relationships, not on altars. Every person you meet is a chance to practice real spirituality. Not perfect, not idealized, but real. With mistakes, with limits, with humanity. Because that's who we are. Humans trying to remember we have a soul. Humans who sometimes err, sometimes get it right, but in every encounter can choose from spirit or from ego, from empathy or from wounding. Don't seek God in the unreachable. Seek it in how you sit at the table with family, in how you greet the waiter, in how you react when someone interrupts or contradicts you. There, right there, your true connection is measured. Not when you're at peace, but when everything inside wants to close. There is no more spiritual experience than seeing another human and deciding not to harm them, although you could, although they deserve it, although no one will ever know. Because in that moment, without music, without incense, without audience, you honor what needs no explanation. And that, and only that, is what transforms. Chapter 20. You are not a sinner. You are unconscious. Since childhood you were taught that to fail was to sin, that to err was to offend a strict God keeping a tally of your falls, that an invisible eye watches every thought, every impulse, every shadow, and you grew up carrying that gaze as if each mistake were a sentence, as if feeling anger, desire, doubt, or fatigue made you less worthy, less spiritual, less acceptable. But you are not a sinner, never have been. What you are, and what we all are, is someone learning, sometimes blindly, sometimes in fear, sometimes propelled by wounds you didn't even know you carried. The problem isn't the mistake. The problem is the judgment, that verdict that falls on you before you can understand what led you to act as you did. There is a vast difference between harming with intent and harming out of unconsciousness. The first is malice. The second is emotional ignorance, and though both have consequences, they don't stem from the same place. There's no true transformation if you crucify yourself every time you stumble. Guilt only prolongs punishment. Awareness, by contrast, offers a way out. Sometimes you were cruel because you didn't know how to set boundaries. Sometimes you lied because you thought truth would cost you everything. Sometimes you yelled because it was the only way you knew to be heard. Does that make you a bad person? No. It makes you someone who hadn't yet awakened. Unconsciousness remains hidden until the pain it causes becomes unbearable, until you look back and ask, how did I not see this before? And that moment isn't sin. It's a seed. It's the start of something far more valuable than perfection, real transformation. But as long as you believe that everything bad in you is sin, you'll keep hiding it, masking it, covering it up to avoid shame. That's what sin does. It fills you with fear of yourself. It makes you distrust your nature, and you begin living artfully, domesticated, controlling everything that doesn't fit the image of virtue you strive to uphold. To be conscious isn't to be perfect. It's to face your dark sides without turning them into light. It's daring to see your selfishness, your laziness, your pride, without justifying them, but also without condemning yourself. Because there, right there, when you stop punishing your humanity, true responsibility begins. And yes, you've done wrong. You've hurt people. You've made decisions you'd change if you could go back. But you don't need a whip. You need awareness. You don't need to live on your knees. You need to learn to stand tall with everything you have been. Spirituality rooted in guilt keeps you infantile. You need someone to tell you right from wrong. You need permission to forgive yourself. You need approval to feel at peace. But awareness gives you something far more precious: inner freedom. Not freedom to do whatever you want without consequence, but freedom to choose with clarity what makes sense for you, what builds you, expands you, honors you. Don't misunderstand. Being conscious doesn't mean you'll never err again. It means you see mistakes sooner, understand them better, and dare to own them without excuses. It means you stop fleeing from yourself. That when you act from a wound again, you recognize it, apologize, and choose differently. Because yes, you will fall, many times. You will repeat patterns. You will have moments when you wonder whether you've really changed anything. But that's the point, to keep looking at yourself honestly, to not use spirituality as a disguise, but as a magnifying glass, one that not only highlights error, but helps you understand the part of you that caused it. And this is crucial. No one awakens by punishment. Awareness grows in an environment of truth and compassion, not guilt and fear. Fear makes you obedient, but not free. Compassion, in contrast, lets you evolve without destroying yourself in the process. You are not a sinner because you desire, because you err, because you think differently, because you feel anger or sadness or envy. Those are part of the human journey. What defines your evolution isn't whether you feel these things, but what you do with them, whether you hide them, deny them, project them, or observe them with courage in order to transform. And no, you won't always know the right path. Sometimes you'll choose poorly. Sometimes you'll stray from yourself to please others. Sometimes you'll want to give up. And all of that is part of the process. Life doesn't demand purity. It demands presence, honesty, the ability to choose again when what you chose no longer serves you. Perhaps some of your pain comes from trying to fit into a notion of good person that isn't even yours, an inherited, imposed idea repeated without scrutiny. In that idea, everything that doesn't fit becomes sin, and you become your own enemy, judge, and executioner. But enough. You don't need more punishment. You need depth, courage, awareness. And that begins by changing the question. Not, why am I like this? But, what did I need when I acted this way? Which part of me was crying out for attention? Which wound was I repeating unknowingly? That's where healing starts. Not on any altar, not in penance, not in eternal repentance. It starts when you decide to treat yourself with the same compassion you long for from others. When you understand that every unconscious act is a poorly spoken plea for love, belonging, or dignity. You are not broken. You are not dirty. You are not a mistake. You are someone remembering who they are amidst a culture that taught you to shame your own humanity. And that, only that, already deserves respect. Thank you for making it this far. If this audiobook made you think, feel, or see your life through new eyes, let me know in the comments. Your voice matters. And if you want more content to awaken your consciousness and speak to you without filters, subscribe and hit the bell. Remember, this is not the end. It's the first step toward you. See you soon.